What if I told you that many of the choices you think are personal have actually been shaped long before you make them? Think about what you eat, what you buy, what you wear. They feel like personal choices, but there are so many things influencing them before we even get to that point. Prices, advertising, technology, social norms, the way businesses work. That's what I've become really interested in through my work. We often ask, how can I make my choices more sustainable? But I think there's another question we need to ask. Why have we built a system that makes us want and consume so much in the first place? And I think fashion is really an interesting place to explore that question. I'm Luca Coscieme, and I work on sustainable lifestyle and systemic change at the Author Cool Institute.
This is Converge, the podcast about the business and art of fashion upcycling.
So, Luca, welcome to Converge. Nice to see you again. We already met. As a little introduction, you are the program lead for sustainable lifestyles at the Hot or Cool Institute, a think tank based in Berlin. You have worked at the Wellbeing Economy Alliance and the European Environment Agency. You have a doctorate in environmental chemistry and ecodynamics. And finally, your path so far has taken you from measuring entire economies to think about what people have in their closets. So I'm interested about that. How did you end up getting interested about measuring what people have in their wardrobes?
First of all, thank you so much for having me here. By looking at people's wardrobes, I think that that's really a consequence of asking a broader question, which is what does it actually take to live a good life? What do we need? Um, and also, how much about that comes from within us, and how much of that comes from what we are told the way of living a good life is, or what a good life is. We are constantly pushed towards thinking that a good or a better life comes mainly through having more and consuming more. So that's kind of the broader question. Is that really what a good life means? Now, if you want to understand the environmental impact of people's lifestyle, you eventually have to look at all of the things that make those lifestyle possible. So, food system, housing, mobility, and of course also clothing and fashion. And fashion is a particularly interesting case because it's where we see a big disconnect between what we see, what we experience as fashion, and where the impacts of fashion actually happen. So we see a T-shirt, but behind that T-shirt, there probably is a very long chain of production, energy use, material and labor that is almost completely invisible to us. I've started looking into people's wardrobe, let's see, put it if you wish, in my research. But really, what interests me is how much can we achieve in fashion by simply making better products. This is, I think, just the starting question of a much broader conversation to me.
I like this approach of, we have to change the way we produce, but also let's think about the end of this chain, like why we consume so much. And I guess in order to understand that, you need to measure things, right? Like measuring impact of the production, of the consumption. And measuring impact is something that we all think that we understand how it works, until someone actually wants to explain. So maybe you can help us there and help us understand what is impact measurement in the simpler way you can.
I'll try. I'm not very good in formulating simple sentences, but in terms of impact, I think, of course, there is the impact of a product. So, when you produce and consume and then discard that product at the end of its life, there are a number of impacts that occur, in the environment through the use of resources, the impact on ecosystem, but also social impacts in terms of employment, in terms of working condition, and all of that. I think, that we need to move a little bit away from looking at per product impacts and look more at systemic impacts. For example, again, if you want to make the example of a T-shirt, you can produce a T-shirt that has a much lower impact because it uses more sustainable fibers, etc., and it's even produced fairly and with good working conditions throughout the value chain. But what if that T-shirt is marketed and sold in a way that makes you buy 3 of them instead of 1, for example? So we need really to look at the total pressures of the system and all of the different layers and aspects that actually shape consumption. So efficiency measures to make product per unit, single product, more sustainable. They are, of course, fundamental, but we need to look at the whole system.
So really having a systemic view is what also help us change things like on the little corners where we work, right? Like I think like in sustainability and environmental action, of course, everyone has their own corner where we work, no, in a certain specific area, but to have this broader vision is like crucial, I think. So when we were growing up, at least when I was growing up, reducing impact was all about using less aerosol. Maybe you heard that, maybe you're younger than me, but you remember this. It was all about the ozone layer, and this has disappeared, this concern. It's not considered a problem anymore. So today, when we talk about impact, what are we talking about? What is really like the major concern?
I think we need to try and resist the temptation of summarizing sustainability in one single number, or as relevant to one single aspect. Of course, there is a lot of talking now and a lot of focus rightfully on climate impact, because we really are in a moment where we will begin to see and experience on our skin on firsthand what are the impacts of that, since we are crossing important thresholds in terms of climate stability. But we need to resist that. There are many intertwined challenges and impact areas. Biodiversity loss is an important one, emissions, pollution. And then, of course, there are the social dimensions. Who is benefiting from the way economic systems work? Who is bearing the costs? Who get access to resources? What happens to people's working conditions and quality of life? So we really need to look at these intertwined challenges, and we need to look at that globally, because the economy today acts at a global scale, or at least kind of the mainstream economy. So we need also to look at multiple challenges and globally.
I guess it's like also what we most see in the news or in social media is what we tend to think that is the most urgent, the most important. But when we talk about CO2 and climate change, mostly related to oil and to CO2, I guess that doesn't mean that the other issues are less important, right? Like waste and what you said, no, the social side of things, biodiversity. I guess they are all the same important and urgent.
Yes, in fact, even more, you cannot address one without looking at the others. If you take fashion, you can't really understand its environmental footprint without understanding the people and the economic relationships that are behind production. These trends we've been seeing in the last decades, fast fashion, ultra fast fashion, they are there because of the inequalities and the social imbalances that exist in the world. So you have, a part of the world that keeps consuming more and more and more, and you have these increasing trends of use. despite the fact that our clothing needs shouldn't really change between what we needed 10 or 20 years ago and what we need now in terms of clothing and fashion. But we see these numbers always increasing. And on the other hand, you have system of production that depend on poor working condition and low wages, and that locks in countries in that system, whereby you cannot disrupt the system without having consequences in terms of employment. But what you are maintaining is an unfair system whereby working conditions are not good. So it's not something we should be proud of, or we should aim at maintaining, at least in its present form. And then I would say, if I can add, the social aspects are also to be seen, within countries. One of the things that stood out in our research on fashion is really the inequality of fashion consumption, whereby you have highest income consumers that have much larger fashion-related emissions and impacts than lower income consumers. And this was a bit surprising because there is, at least for fast fashion, this kind of tendency to think that cheap clothing and fast fashion brand would enable like lower income groups to fulfill their clothing needs, whereby we're seeing that they mostly play the role as a further channel for people to consume beyond their needs and on top of what they already were consuming.
So definitely, I think this idea of democratizing fashion, maybe you heard of this. This always comes up, this argument or this way of reasoning, no, that fast fashion democratized the access to fashion. But so what you are saying is that it actually allows people that was already consuming a lot to consume even more, whereas the people that has less economic power will continue consuming more or less the same and not creating the bigger impact, right?
Yeah.
This is very interesting, and how this system perpetuates also these inequalities. Talking about fashion, right? We are here now, and this is what interests me the most because I am an upcycler. I have an upcycling brand, and I'm very interested about my own impact. And also, what we were saying about how fashion consumption is so important and so determining everything that is happening. Your research found that reducing fashion consumption is the fastest, most effective way to cut emissions. Not because the emissions happen at the point of consumption, it is because less consumption will mean less production, right? Which makes sense. Is this and then what we need? We need less production in this case, then because this makes me think where I stand as an upcycler, also putting things outside there.
Yeah, as you said, we found that kind of the one most important and most effective way a consumer or a person can do to reduce clothing impacts is to stop buying so much stuff and try to find a way to align what we purchase and what we consume with what we actually need as much as possible. And of course, upcycling is very important and it can contribute to that like larger vision in many ways. So I think that upcycling designers could ask themselves not just, how can I use what is existing to give it a new life, but also what is this product replacing? And this kind of questioning and reasoning can lead to different approaches, I think, on how an upcycling brand or an upcycling designer presents itself and its work. It becomes a question of trying to also stimulate and encourage people to look at upcycling as something that can really substitute purchasing new clothes and not as something that adds on top of that.
Actually, my perspective is like that people that buys, for instance, my designs, in most of the cases, it doesn't mean that they stop buying fast fashion. They actually buy both. But at least they open this little door for me to tell them, look, this is a better choice. This is unique. Nobody's going to wear this. And actually, you can also do this at home. You can also put your own creativity on the clothes that you already own. So the hope is that with the time, they will reflect on their own consumption ways and choose for the better one. I think upcycling has a lot of education in a way. That's mostly it's like a ongoing activism. Let's say. I think that there is this risk that we think that we are the good guys just because we reuse materials. But what would you say is a fair way to think about our impact as upcyclers? How could we reflect on that?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't frame it as like upcycling is good or bad. I would frame it around broader questions such as: are you extending the life of something that already exists? Are you displacing the purchase of something new? Are you helping people to value clothing for longer? Or even are you helping people to find their style? This is also very important because a segment of the people that tend to overconsume and go to fast fashion broadly more frequently is people that sometimes don't even care about fashion. They just don't know how to shop. They just don't know what to wear. Because I think that if you find something that really fits you and that really matches your style, then you are more inclined, that it's more possible that you're going to use for longer, that you're going to repair, that you're going to take care of it. So yeah, I think that the question should be, what kind of consumption are you enabling as an upcycler?
So as independent designers, we really have so many jobs to do because actually all upcycling designers are small businesses. And so we have so many different areas of our companies to cover ourselves. And then comes the issue that we have to track our impact. And this adds one more task on top of our list. So how can this be made easy for us? Like if we should concentrate on one or two things that we should track and measure, what would it be?
Be careful about giving designers another long list of things to measure. You shouldn't need to become a life cycle assessment expert to understand whether your business is moving in the right direction and is aligned with what may be your mission. We could start from something much simpler, which is, as I was saying also before, what are you replacing? If you are taking an existing material and extend its useful life, that's important. If you are replacing the purchase of a new garment, I think that's even more important. Then I'd ask whether your business is changing people's relationship with clothing in a deeper way. It is encouraging people to value, to repair, to reuse, and keep things for longer. And finding answers to this question within your business and other upcyclers' business, I think sometimes tell you more than a very precise footprint number. We need a little bit more to maybe connect people what they are proposed now as a way to consume. It's not necessarily within us. It comes from external pressures, external messages we are bombarded with, and people, maybe not the majority of people, but many people is exhausted about that. So you can set them free.
Definitely. No, and also fashion is so like broad because I think it's when I go back tracking people's decisions or my own decisions about things, it's very also much to do with a psychological issue. Like if you're an insecure person, if you want to belong to a certain status or a certain group, or if you want to be an outsider, there are so many different layers in the decision making. And then we, in the last years, we added this layer of, okay, but we also have to be conscious and sustainable on top of that. And sometimes it's like too much information, I think, also for the user. So yes, I try to make it easier for people. I think it's a good point. So you work on well-being economics, and then I ask myself if we are bringing something to well-being, if we are helping people's well-being, because we say in a narrative it's like we're taking trash from the street, we're saving things from landfill. Do you think that that's an indicator maybe to measure our impact, like if we are doing something good for society, for well-being?
Yeah, I think that people's well-being should be more central to sustainability issues. In some of our recent work, we're also claiming for kind of bringing well-being into the circular economy a bit more, because circular economy is now, at least kind of politically at the EU level, is kind of mostly framed as something of a strictly technical agenda with solutions that mean to reduce the impacts of the production of single items, and people is sometimes left out. There is no point at looking at sustainability as optimizing production systems within the planet if then people is miserable or it's unhappy. So the point is to create the condition for people to live good lives within key ecological limits. And we need to be much better in communicating that, because now, sustainability transition is most of the times presented as a story of sacrifice and of things we have to give up. But instead, it's a story of better lives, because if we live within the ecological limits, at the end, we're going to have better health. We are going to have lower costs, kind of repairing the damages we are doing to ourselves. So it should be presented as a pathway towards better lives for all, not as the urgency of having to give up anything.
Yes. Comfort or, yeah. And that's why we are also here in a podcast, trying to bring all this to the audience and to share this idea. I really think, my background is communication. I studied communication. And so for me, in my brand, half of the energy I put is in the communication. First of all, because I think it brings a lot of value, to things that people buy, to know where they come from, how they were made, and also to help them understand all the work that is behind and these things. And also, the name of my brand is therapy. And I think that's the part where I talk about well-being, because for me, it really, the name comes as, it started as a creative therapy to repair clothes, to remake clothes for myself first. And it's also like an invitation to say people, like, if you are more creative, then you're going to feel better, if you do something creative. And so it's totally intertwined, I think. Whereas when you go buying, and this was my aha moment when I was going and to the mall and just looking at the windows and maybe just buying very easily things from the rack, this satisfaction just was there for a few hours and then it was gone. So it's really like an invitation to, let's do it different, because actually it's better for us. And this is the underlying message that we have to put on top. And so you were talking about circular fashion, and do you think that this can be the solution for the fashion problem? I mean, like all these practices, like have more of those: repair, resell, rent, and upcycling, recycling.
Yeah, I think we need to look, the original circular economy vision is broader than that. It doesn't focus necessarily or mostly on the kind of end of life or even the use phase. What the circular economy should address is how to reduce the overall use of materials, of resources, of that. And for certain part of the world, which is where we are living in now, in Berlin, in Europe, and for certain group of people in terms of what they earn and how much they consume, that means consuming less ultimately, because it's not just about repairing, recycling. That's a very important part, of course, but we need to go beyond that and rejoin with the original vision of a circular economy and with kind of its overarching mission on what it wants to achieve. As I was saying at the beginning, there is no point of making one product more sustainable if then each one of us consumes more and more and more and more units of that product every year, because we are just pushed constantly in that direction by, social norms, advertising, marketing, and even, if you have a system of infrastructure, technology, and policies that also push in that direction. So we need incentives to circular solutions, circular business models such as yours. But at the same time, we need also to disincentivize the others. Otherwise, you will not have an equal playing field. You need also to reduce those unsustainable pushes. Otherwise, you're not going to achieve the kind of systemic change that our institute, but also many other organizations are seeing as what do we actually need as the effective solution to the global challenges we are facing.
definitely it's a lot about consumer behavior here involved, and you have spent quite a long time looking at that and trying to understand the fashion system itself. What did you find there that changed the way you think about the individual choices?
Yeah, I think that sustainability of our consumption is not just the result of the cumulative result of bad individual choices. It's systemic. There is a lot of people that is looking for alternatives, and they just don't find this accessible to them in any ways. If there is no public transport where you live, you are kind of pushed towards buying a car and using a car and driving around. If everyone around you constantly tell you that to be happy, you need to travel to the other end of the world every summer. So we need really to reform the system that is in the background to our decisions. And this, at the end, means that we're going to have actually more freedom of choice, because now sometimes these kind of sustainability arguments are framed as taking away choices from people, but it's the other way around. I think today, in terms of mobility, in terms of purchasing of goods and services, we do not have as much choice as we think we do, because of the infrastructures around us and the social norms and all of that. So we really need to give more choice to people.
Yeah, definitely. Also, that made me think about. I read about this guy in Spain that invented, before the pandemic, he invented a light bulb that could be forever repaired, so it has no planned obsolescence. But he couldn't find a way to bring that to the market. Green energies that you think like this works perfectly. Why are we not already using this? And yeah, we don't have all the choices because there are certain industries that are being pushed that we consume only that one and not the other one. I think we're in a great moment for this conversation because in September there are this green claim directly coming from the European Union that is going to brought into power in September, and the aim is to stop greenwashing, which is amazing. And thinking about my perspective, like a small business, an upcycler that is listening to the podcast, and I want to start tracking my impact or really measuring my impact because I want to comply with these new regulations and also because I'm interested in this. No? So, can you tell me if there are already solutions, easy solutions, like things that we can use, small businesses?
I'm not into that kind of more technical part, but what I can tell you about this directive is that it's great to see it, and greenwashing is absolutely an important problem. I think that now has the space to become more ambitious. Now that we realize and it's acknowledged how big is the impact of the sector and the industry, and what are the roots, what are the drivers at the root of these problems. Now we have to look at greenwashing at the EU. Now we have to look a little bit broader and deeper on what is the role of advertising in our society. How fair and how aligned with our vision of sustainable society is having an industry as advertising that constantly pushes against what we need, what we know that we need in order to live better lives and to address the environmental and social challenges we are facing. So the directive is great, but I hope it's a first step to start looking at marketing and advertising, asking really kind of deeper questions about it and what we see the role of advertising should be in this fair and sustainable society that we always see, in the visions of the EU sustainability agendas.
As a journalist and someone that comes from communication, I always thought about this. Actually, in 2020, just before the pandemic, we put together a collection with my partner, which is my sister, and it was about that. It was about how advertisement it's not allowing us to develop better societies. Actually, it's on the contrary. It's bringing a lot of problems. And so we always have a final question for everybody is the same. And it's, if you could upcycle anything in the world, what would it be?
Yeah, I think that would be the whole fashion system. I think that needs to be taken apart a little bit and keep what is valuable, which is the creativity, the beauty, the identity, the livelihoods, the pleasure, and rethink the parts that are driving us beyond ecological limits. And while we rebuild that, while we upcycle the fashion system, we really need to ask, how can fashion help people live well without costing us the planet?
I love it. Thank you so much for this very interesting, meaningful, and rich conversation. I have learned a lot, and I hope our listeners, it will be the same for them. Thank you so much, Luca.
Thank you so much.
Next on Converge, Eric Vinsonu. He spent his career inside the machinery of fashion supply chains, then walked away onto the runway instead, as a model and activist. Founder of Reclaimed, a fashion show concept built to change how people see fashion. We talk about what it means to be the face presenting a brand, the ethics behind that choice, and why an upcycling fashion show is much more than a fashion show.